In the silence after the flames, 4 names endured: Vash, Silas, Gideon, and Taron. Not heirs of blood, but survivors of something deeper, a chosen family bound by laughter, by shared hunger, and by the fierce love of a woman who saw worth where the world saw waste. The house of the Forsaken had not been built of stone and timber alone. It was stitched together by Alara's unyielding care, by Jarek's quiet watchfulness, and by the reckless hope of those who dared to call such ruin home. It was not a house, it was a haven. Now it was ash. The fire had not just razed the walls, it had gutted something sacred. No tombstones would mark the dead, only memory and the 4 who staggered from the wreckage. Captain Caspian Vale did not rescue them. He offered no solace, no empty promises. They were given a place aboard his ship not out of mercy, but because Althea, his kin and his reckoning, asked it of him. She'd seen the fire behind their eyes amidst the ruin of the house of the Forsaken, eyes not merely broken but smouldering with something fierce and unyielding. So he let them aboard, not as an act of kindness but as a wager. Under Althea's command they were no longer mourners nor orphans. She did not coddle their grief, she honed it, tempered it like steel upon the whetstone of survival. Salt, wind, and order became their daily bread. The deck was their crucible, rope, sail, command, endurance. Every calloused palm and every sleepless night stripped away what remained of their former selves. She gave them no sanctuary from sorrow, only purpose. They were not forsaken anymore, they were crew. Those first 2 years became the forge. From sun-up to the second bell of the moon, the boys served as helping hands aboard the Starling Gale, Vale's secondary brigantine. They hauled rope and scrubbed decks slick with brine and tar. They learned the rhythm of sails and the voice of the wind, how to brace against the roll of the sea and whisper silent thanks when storms passed without toll. Taron, ever precise, became adept at knotwork and navigation, charting stars with a patience that belied his age. Gideon, wiry and bold, took quickly to the rigging, earning the crew's respect as he danced atop masts with a rope-bitten grin. Silas was quieter, often watching more than speaking, but his hands were steady in the galley and his presence oddly calming during tense hours on deck. And Vash, sharp-eyed and restless, found himself drawn to every aspect of the ship, insatiable in his need to know. He observed Althea with a fervent focus, her methods, her moods, her maps. More than once he caught her watching him back. They were no longer children. In the span of seasons they became something new, not yet mariners but no longer boys of the land. Their hands blistered, their backs straightened, and their eyes turned ever toward the horizon. The Forsaken were gone, but in the salt-slick planks of the ship and the howling sea spray of dawn, the last of the scavengers from the bazaar found life anew, not as pickpockets and scrap thieves, but as crew. 2 years to the day since the boys first stepped aboard as salt-bitten novices, a new chapter was writ upon the waves. Althea had grown too, not just in rank, but in soul. The girl who once measured herself against sails and expectations had become a young woman who charted her own course, tested and tempered by command. Captain Vale himself acknowledged it in formal council, though his voice bore the usual edge of restraint. "She's not raw iron anymore," the captain had said, arms folded as he watched Althea spar with his crew in the pre-dawn haze. "She's blade. It's time she carried one of her own." And so it was that a ship was granted, newly built, sea-hardened, sleek in form, and hungry for voyages yet unmade. Althea named it the Ashen Grace, a name that drew silence across the docks the moment it was spoken. No one needed to ask why. The house of the Forsaken had burned, yes, but from ash something enduring would rise. The ship was her vow, grace born of ruin, memory given sail. Captain Caspian, grizzled and broad-shouldered with a voice that scraped like gravel, stood before the chosen crew on the dock beside the christened hull. Sea breeze tugged at his coat and salt lingered in the air like a blessing. He eyed the small crowd, veterans, apprentices, and those hand-picked for promise. Then his gaze settled on the four standing side by side, Vash, Silas, Gideon, Taron, no longer boys, no longer just survivors. "You know what this ship stands for," Caspian said, loud enough for every man, woman, and gull in the harbour to hear. "It's not just a vessel. It's a damn memory, carved into keel and mast, and she'll carry more than cargo. She'll carry purpose." He turned to Althea, who stood proud, her hand on the hilt of a sabre that had never yet tasted blood. "You've earned her," he said with a nod. "Now earn her crew." He gestured toward the four. "They're yours if they'll have you." Then to them, eyes narrowing, "Do you swear your loyalty? Not to a flag, nor coin, nor creed, but to your captain, to her command, to her cause." For a breath, the only sound was the waves slapping gently against the hull. Then Vash stepped forward, voice steady. "We do." One by one, the others echoed him. Silas, quiet but fierce. Gideon, solemn as a vow. Taron, grinning through clenched teeth like he was daring the sea to disagree. Vash looked at Althea, and in his heart there surged no doubt. She had given them more than a place on a ship. She had given them direction, dignity, and the fire to stand again. He would die to protect her. They all would. For her, they would become something new. And Althea, though her face remained composed, felt her chest tighten. She still remembered the scent of smoke that clung to the ruins of the forsaken manor. She had walked its broken halls after the fire, had seen what was done, what could never be undone. The silence of that place had spoken to her, and it had never truly stopped speaking since. The boys were not her blood, but she had seen their pain, and from that moment on their future felt like hers to guard. She nodded once, firm. Then let it be so. And as the crew filed aboard the Ashen Grace, the sun broke through the morning haze, and the sea seemed, for just a moment, to shimmer with promise. By the third year of their service, the crew of the Ashen Grace were no longer green hands gripping the rail with queasy knuckles. They were mariners in truth, weathered, sure-footed, and wedded to the sea's temperament like the tides themselves. The ship had become an extension of their limbs, her masts like bones, her sails the breath that carried their resolve. Their route was fixed, familiar, and fiercely guarded, a 4-day passage between the fortified port of Velvenreach and the now liberated stronghold of Cindermore docks. Thanks to Captain Caspian's brutal campaign that had secured Cindermore months prior, the waters near the heartland were quiet, a rare hush along the war-torn coasts of Meridia. The reavers no longer reached inland, their raids broken and scattered. Farther out, the Meridian Armada waged its relentless war against the Crimson Corsairs, who still prowled the northern tides in force, but had yet to breach the deeper currents. In that fragile breath of calm, the Ashen Grace made her home. Velvenreach was a city carved of alabaster and living wood, its harbour co-governed by Eldorian and Meridian influence. Eldorian architecture clung like ivy to the cliffsides, archways of flowering vines, slender towers woven with copper filigree, and quayside walkways shaded by silken canopies. In stark contrast to Meridia's boisterous stone docks and barrel-chested sailors, Velvenreach exuded quiet dignity and grace. Even the taverns bore this dual spirit, Meridian barkeeps shouting orders in heavy brogue beneath Eldorian chandeliers of moon crystal and carved oak. Here, the Ashen Grace docked for 2 days at a time, taking on weapons, enchanted timber, spellbound oars, fortified rations, salves and wards, supplies forged and blessed in Eldoria for the Meridian front. Vash and the others would spend the better part of these stops assisting quartermasters, deciphering shipping manifests etched in 3 tongues, and guiding the delicate crates marked with sigils that shimmered under moonlight. Taron often lingered at the dock's navigation towers, absorbing new star maps shared by Eldorian scholars. Silas preferred the apothecaries, shadowed corners filled with whispering herbs and strange incense. Gideon, ever drawn to tales, could be found trading stories with retired sky riggers and wandering poets alike. But the rhythm of duty kept them grounded. After 2 days, the ship was reloaded and set to sail. When fully laden, the Ashen Grace ran heavy and slow, her keel deeper in the water. Navigation required greater care. The slightest error near shallow reefs could prove catastrophic. On such return trips, Althea kept double watches, and Vash would often take helm duty under her silent supervision, his hands firm on the wheel as sea spray danced along the prow. The return to Cindermore docks was familiar in every sense, a 4-day stretch if light and swift, nearly 5 if the hold was full and the winds fickle. The crew had grown so attuned to the sea lanes that they could read the change of tide in the bend of a sail or predict a shoal by the patterns of seabird flight. They marked waypoints by memory, the twin spires of Argan's Teeth, the pale fog bank that cloaked the reef of lanterns, the shattered watchtower of Yvon's Edge. Cindermore docks stood in stark contrast to Velven Reach. It was rougher, louder, and teeming with life, like a city that had remembered how to breathe after years under siege. Smoke from forge houses rose in thin columns beside, the scent of salt, fish, and tanned leather. The piers were vast and numerous, extending into the central belly of Meridia's inland sea like fingers grasping for trade. It was here, at this crucial junction, that the Ashen Grace became an artery of the Meridian war effort. The crew knew every inch of the docks, where to unload heavy ordnance for the western battlements, where to deliver the sealed crates of blessed iron for the Order of the Bronze Flame. Not every crate that passed through the Ashen Grace made it to its official destination. A few went missing now and then, slipped into the wrong hands, or left conveniently unrecorded in the chaos of war. Taron, who had never fully let go of his dockside instincts, always seemed to know who was buying, what they were willing to pay, and how to disappear a crate without raising alarm. It wasn't much, but in war, a little coin went a long way. They worked in shifts throughout their 3 to 4 day stay, unloading the ship, sorting and redistributing cargo, replenishing provisions and ship stores, and overseeing minor repairs. Rest came in snatches, caught in the hammocks of dockside barracks or beneath the ship's awning when the labour allowed. For Vash and the others, Cindermore was a second home. Taron would often vanish for an hour to return with contraband pastries from the back alleys of Market Row. Gideon, for his part, was slowly becoming a brawler. He had a knack for finding trouble and fists to greet it. Whether in dockside taverns, crowded supply yards, or alleyways behind the smithies, he always managed to stumble into a fight and charm his way out of it, nursing bruises like trophies and wearing his grin like armor. Silas, always drawn to the quiet, spent time with the old wharf seers, listening to tales carried on salt wind and superstition. And Vash. He walked the length of the harbour, watching, observing. He drank in the rhythm of the port and the war machine it fueled. It was not glory, but it was purpose. Each round trip, Velven Reach to Cindermore and back again, etched deeper discipline into their bones. They could now reef and reset a mainsail in a squall. They could chart stars without light. They could smell an approaching storm before the gulls went silent. Their hands bore rope burns that had hardened into calluses, and their steps swayed with the unconscious grace of those who live more at sea than on land. But even in that rhythm, something restless stirred. Though the route was safe, even blessedly so, and though each mission fed the fires of the Meridian front, the repetition began to weigh on the younger crew. The Ashen Grace sailed clean, purposeful lines, but beneath it all was the unspoken truth. This was not war, this was support. Vital, yes, but distant. For Vash, and slowly for the others, it became clear they were becoming masters of routine in a world unraveling beyond the horizon, and while their ship bore the name of their lost house, they had yet to face a single foe. But that, the sea whispered, would not last. The tide's mercy was their favoured haunt in Cindermoor, a salt-washed tavern built atop pylons that creaked with every tide. Lanterns swayed gently from the rafters, casting golden light across sea-stained tables, and a floor slick with brine and old song. Smoke curled from a long hearth in the corner, where sailors dried wet boots and older men told stories no one believed. Vash sat with Gideon and Taron at a corner table near the open shutters, the harbour's bustle a distant hum beyond the ale-scented air. Outside, dockhands were finishing the last of the loading, crates bound for Velven Reach, stacked like stepping stones toward duty. Althea joined them, shaking drizzle from her coat, her usual composure softened just enough by the familiarity of the setting. "They'll finish in another hour," she said, settling into the seat beside Vash. "Get your rest while you can." "I've rested enough," Vash replied, not looking at her. His tone was calm, but there was a quiet current running beneath it. "We all have." Althea arched an eyebrow. That sounded like complaint. "It is," he said, finally turning to meet her gaze. 2 years of supply runs. 2 years of sailing the same stretch of water. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but this isn't what I thought we'd be doing when we signed on." Taron leaned forward, lowering his voice. "He's not wrong. We know every bend between here and Velven Reach. Even the gulls know our sailcloth. We're trained, we're fast, and we've learned more than half the senior crews. So why are we still just hauling crates?" Althea's mouth twitched, part frown, part restrained agreement. "Because Captain Caspian orders it, and because until he says otherwise, our job is to ensure that front lines don't starve or bleed dry. You don't win wars on the tip of a blade alone. Supply chains are what hold a realm together." Gideon tapped the edge of his tankard, thoughtful. "She's right. But there's more. You want it too, don't you? Something more than logistics. I see it in the way you stare at the sea when no one's speaking." Althea's expression shifted, still composed but clouded. "I do. But it's not just about wanting. It's about readiness. The first time I held command, it was just us, and the shadow of a house burned to ash. I won't throw you into the storm just because you're eager." Vash's jaw tensed. "We're not fragile anymore, Althea." "No," she said, her voice quieter. "You're not. But I remember what I saw in the ruins of the Forsaken House. I remember what it did to you, and to me. That kind of loss leaves something behind. A weight. And I carry it, too." The table fell into silence for a moment, filled only by the low murmur of the tavern and the distant call of gulls. It was Gideon who broke it. "Where's Silas?" Taron glanced toward the door. "Didn't come. Said he wasn't feeling well. Probably holed up in the quarterdeck again." "He hasn't been the same," Vash said quietly. "He's quiet even when he speaks. Something's off." "I've seen the way he moves lately," Taron added, "like he's not always here. It's like shadows follow him differently now." Althea exhaled, rubbing her temples. "I know. I've spoken with him, but he's withdrawn. Says he's fine, but I'm not sure he even believes it himself. Keep an eye on him. Gently." "Always," said Vash, and the others nodded. The silence returned, deeper this time, not uncomfortable but contemplative. "I'm not asking for glory," Vash said at last. "Just something more. Something that makes all this training feel like it was meant for something greater." Althea looked at him, and for a heartbeat her gaze softened in a way she rarely allowed. "I'll find it," she promised. "When the time comes, I'll fight to make sure we're ready for it. But not one day too soon. We earn that next step. Together." Vash raised his cup. "To the Ashen Grace, then." and to what's waiting beyond the horizon. The others raised theirs too, solemn and sure. Beyond the shutters the sea breathed slow and even, but in the quiet hearts of the crew the storm had already begun to stir. The sea rocked the Ashen Grace with its familiar rhythm, a lullaby to most of the crew as they settled into their hammocks or took final watch under the stars. But below deck, in a narrow unlit storage hold near the stern, Silas paced alone. The room was little more than a hollow belly of wood and shadow. Crates of dry rations lined the walls, and canvas tarps hung in loose folds from ceiling beams like forgotten shrouds. Only the flicker of moonlight leaking through the knotted gaps in the boards above offered any definition to the gloom. Here in the darkness, Silas had carved a space away from the others, a space to be unseen. His breath came fast, shallow. Sweat clung to his brow and soaked the collar of his shirt, though the room was cool. His skin shivered in waves, as though something just beneath it was shifting, pulling at the seams of his form. "Not now," he murmured hoarsely, planting his hands on the crate before him. "Not like this." But it was happening again. The feeling had begun weeks ago, small moments of disorientation, of stepping through a doorway and realizing he was already on the other side. Shadows had begun to cling to him longer than they should, stretching with him, breathing with him. He had been training in secret, trying to coax whatever this was into something he could control. Small flickers of movement, brief flashes, but nothing like tonight. He stumbled back, eyes wide, chest heaving. The air felt heavier now, like it was pressing in. The shadows around him deepened, not unnaturally, but intimately, like they recognized him, welcomed him. Then the pressure inside snapped. He exhaled sharply as his vision blurred, then blinked, and he was standing 15 feet away from where he had been, crouched behind a barrel in the far corner of the hold. A ragged gasp tore from his throat. "What?" He pressed a hand to his chest, his pulse hammered beneath it, and his body trembled with exertion. Every muscle ached as if he'd sprinted a mile. His lungs burned, sweat dripped from his fingertips. But he was there, not here. He had moved. No, not moved. He had stepped. Between shadows. He slumped to the floor, back against the wood, staring at the dim outlines of the room he had crossed. It had been instinct, reflex. A moment of panic, of unraveling, and the shadow had answered. His eyes adjusted slowly. The darkness was no longer just a void. It pulsed. It listened. And for the first time he wondered not only what he was becoming, but whether the others would still recognize him when he arrived.